So with that mix now,
Yes.
one would have thought that we would have been able to forge ahead knowing that time is ticking. Remember, before the composition of this conference, we had you in our studios.
Yes.
We talked about some of the issues that could be brought to the table, and those are the issues we have just seen. So it's not a new discourse that we have just seen. What would be your own take if you were to really forge ahead? Because the way that report ended, my colleague there said, well, this could either make or mar the conference. And for a lot of Nigerians, they have hopes in this particular conference. That hope, how can we sustain it as a member of the conference?
Well, actually, the hope is sustainable. And I think that what we really need to bring to table there, the oil-bearing areas are insisting that, of course, they need greater derivation as a first-line charge on the federation account. It used to be 13%, but what the Constitution spoke about is not less than 13%. Of the totally generated federation accounts. Now, but they are now insisting that 13% was fixed many years ago, and that the devastation, the pollution had continued unabated, and that there is a need to have an increase. And they were talking about 50%. That at independence and during the Republican Constitution. Now, those two constitutions now spoke about 50% derivation in respect of revenue generated from any part of the country. Now, so they are insisting that if at independence and during the Republican Constitution up to 1966, you could have 50%. Why now that you cannot have 50%? So they were insisting on 50%. Of course, that will create its own problems in terms of the fact that the country for so long had become more like a feeding bottle economy. And people were now suggesting that perhaps we should have a graded removal from that addiction, to the oil money, that you could space the withdrawal, that you start from somewhere. Now, when it came to starting from somewhere, well, they were suggesting between 21 and 25. Of course, they came back to 21 to 25. But the majority of members, because they will be directly affected anyway, there were various calculations as to what would be the aggregate loss. And of course, don't forget that even at 13%, the argument here is that a state like Akwa Ibom received almost equivalent to what the whole of the Southeast received, or to what the whole of the Northeast received. There is that argument really. But then there was also the argument that, well, yes, they did, but that now is the time to have an increase. And there was this 21 to 25 bracket. But again, the whole country, you take it, it became a sharply divided issue between the North and South. The North would want a retention of status quo, which is 13%. But parts of the South that are not even oil-bearing are prepared to concede, to say, okay, well, we can move on to 21. Some said we can move on to 18. And it became something being banded between 15, 18, and 21. Well, at some point in time, many of us felt that 18 would be a fair game. Now, if you have 18, and then over the next 5 years, and now, before this issue came up, there was a committee on energy that prescribed that rather than relying only on oil, that Nigeria sits atop of hundreds of minerals, that there should be a special fund to assist in the development of all these minerals across the country. And the conference agreed that 5% should be set aside to assist over time in developing minerals across the country.
But the revenue formula will remain the same?
The revenue formula will remain the same, but that 5% of money accruing to the federal government, because you know there's a clear distinction between the federation account and the federal government account. Federal government account is what share it gets at the end of the sharing exercise, because you have the federation account taking into the pool everything that comes into the revenue pot.
Did they have any fear that, look, even if they start giving this 5%,
yes,
what's the guarantee that when they give those 5%, it will be used to develop those resources?
Well, that is even coming to it later. There are many fears there, but then these are fears that can be overcome. That, well, we will have a good government, they will set aside this 5% and it will be devoted to, concentrating on developing the mineral resources.
So in other words, that is trying to take us out of our mono economy system,
so that it can be diversified. Because in any case, if you have, all the states, incidentally, sits atop, each state sits atop of one mineral or the other. So the argument was that every part of the country will benefit. And if you develop this, at least states can now be weaned directly, from the feeding bottle, which, of course, the oil-bearing areas in the south and part of Kogi and Edo.
Does the committee get a sense? Because, I heard a lot of people say that, look, if they get that part right,
yes, you
solve, if not 80% of the challenge this country is facing.
Yes.
Insurgency, unemployment.
Yeah.
That's at the center of it. Does that committee or do the delegates ever have that sense anytime?
I will say yes, but what brought in the complication, and this is why sometimes the issues of this country, you can never be rational about it, because you don't. Once that had been put in place, the 5% for the mineral development, and then people were talking of, yes, it would be fair to let the oil-bearing states to take 18, and then there was also an attempt to tinker with what the federal government gets, and then what goes to the states. Now, there are recommendations. No decision had been taken on that yet, but the recommendation was that the federal government should come down from about 48 to 52, which it used to get, to about 42 to 40 to 42. And then the states can now have more. The states and the local governments can now have between 58 and 60.
But at the moment, you say, look, they've not even reached.
No, we have not even taken
all those fights, all these arguments.
It's
about what the states bearing oil gets.
And then, but what is now complicating it is this. I think there is some kind of a sense of agreement or agreeing around the 18% basket. But then the North now came in with a proposal to have 5% set aside as what they call a crisis management fund that will now be given directly to the Northeast, North Central, maybe parts of the Northwest, because of the ongoing insurrection. And the feeling, and I think it's a normal feeling, is that the federal government has always had a 1.5% account in its federal government account that is devoted to managing crises across the country. Even if that would be raised, it will be within the prerogative of the federal government in its budgetary process. Why now insist that another 5% must be set aside and given directly to these 3 zones? That the other 3 zones in the country, is it that you will now need to create insurrection in all the parts of the country to be able to benefit from such a fund? And 5% of the federation account is a whooping sum. That is what is causing the problem now.
Just a moment, though. This has also, focused on what exactly is coming in now. Most of those calculations and permutations, even though it's a winning process that they're also suggesting, is based on what is currently accruing to the Federation account. What was the discussion like being on devolution of powers, or the conference hasn't reached there yet?
Oh, no, we actually, that's the last committee that we are working on. And that is where all these vital issues are rearing their heads. But I can say this, I'll say authoritatively, that the general mood is that the central government, in fact, there is almost a unanimity that the federal government is not federal, it's unitary. And that power needs to be devolved much more to the federating units. And quite a number of such powers have been tampered with, really, like the state police, where a decision was taken that the states that can, fund it should set up their own police. And then you've had quite a number of other functions that are now being brought from the exclusive legislative list down to the concurrent list, which means that the states can also invest directly in transportation, like railway, in building airports, which before, remained the exclusive preserve of the federal government.
Do you also see a shifting? Because there some people will say that they've observed hardliners. Do you see a shifting of hardliners to, say, somewhere in the middle?
Hardliners in what respect? In
respect of, the federation account and sharing of resources.
Well, you see, what is the middle ground? The middle ground really is that the oil-bearing areas are determined. In fact, I do understand from general discussions that the 18% is not even acceptable to them. But I think their leadership are also pressing that they should accept 18%. If they accept 18%, my own take is that what remains of the whole federation account will now be 100 minus 18, which is, I think, 82%. The general argument is that 82% should just go on the sharing table between the federal government and the federating units. And then any of the federating units can now decide, because now we had recommended that rather than the federal government having 52, it should go down to 42, which means that there is an extra 10% that can go, or that will go to the states and the local governments. So, which means also that there will be greater funds available to the states and local governments across the country. Now, the problem all along had been that even the waste that we speak of at the federal level, the corruption that we speak of, essentially, you will not even put it at people just being corrupt, but normally you put it at lack of capacity to manage such huge resources that comes to them, that the capacity is not there. And once you lack the capacity to handle something, that is when Gowon spoke about, we have too much money, we don't know what to do with it. Now, but if you now reduce that pot to about 42%, and the states can have much more. Now, the states are many, the local governments are many, the needs are diverse. They can hopefully, apply much of these resources much more efficiently than the federal government could have ever hoped to do sitting down in Abuja.
Okay, all right, we'll have to wrap it up there. Well, we need to also remind, someone sends a comment saying, well, those between 18 to 35-year-olds that you talk about are only 18 out of the 492 in the conference. Just a reminder, though.
Yes.
But thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
Mr. Wale Oshun is a delegate at the ongoing national conference. And by the way, when are you winding down? Are they going to seek for an extension of time?
We really don't have to, because in this coming week, once we finish with the final committee report, which is the devolution, that now encompasses all of this. I should hope Monday, Tuesday, we should be able to do that. Okay. And then make our recommendations to the government on the mode of implementation and all that. I should expect that before the end of July. I mean, because you will now need about a week or two to put the reports together for members to convene again and approve the report, hopefully before the end of July.
Okay, all the best then.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back after this break. Join us again.